Pentagon and local communities had chosen to honor at Virginia bases. Van Barclay, he was a Mississippi native, Mr. Chair, who came to Fort Pickett in the early 40s to train for war. He fought all over Europe in World War II. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his bravery. Leading his platoon in southern Italy, he killed 10 of the enemy, captured 17 more, and escorted 2 wounded Americans 1,700 yards to safety under enemy fire. Stayed in the Army for another 34 years, seeing action in both the Korean and the Vietnam Wars, and being assigned as the Army liaison to the Virginia National Guard at Fort Pickett. Long after he retired, he maintained his tie to the court and to the Virginia National Guard. I was at the naming ceremony, where this base, to which he had devoted much of his life, was named in his honor. His family was there, and they were so proud. Arthur Gregg served in the Army for more than 30 years, first African-American to reach the rank of Brigadier General, first to reach the rank of Lieutenant General. Began as an enlisted, eventually decided to become a commissioned officer, went to Fort Lee for quartermaster training, quickly rose through the ranks as an instructor, even though he was not allowed to go to the officers' club because of the color of his skin. He finished his career in 1979 as the director of all Army logistics operations around the world. He stayed near Fort Lee in retirement, raised his family there, and was a continuous beloved presence until his death last summer at 96. He was actually at the renaming ceremony with his family in 2022 to get this place that meant so much to him. Charity Adams. Charity Adams was an Army officer during World War II, the first African-American woman allowed to join the ranks. She was the commanding officer of the 6888 Central Postal Director Battalion, a unique battalion composed primarily of African-American women, making sure that American GIs in Europe got their mail during World War II. Our colleagues Jackie Rosen and Jerry Moran successfully passed a bill in 2022, giving the 6th AAA the Congressional Gold Medal. Charity Adams was the highest ranking African-American woman in the military during World War II. Her family was at the dedication of Fort Gregg Adams, named in honor of these 2 trailblazing logistics. Finally, Mary Walker, the only woman ever received a Congressional Medal of Honor. She graduated from Syracuse Medical School in 1855. She tried to join the Union Army as a surgeon, was turned away because she was a woman. But the need was so great, she eventually got hired at a military hospital in Washington. And then was deployed as an Army surgeon with the Army of the Cumberland and the 52nd Ohio Infantry, becoming the first female surgeon in the U.S. Army. She served all over Virginia, including the place where the base is now named after her. She frequently crossed battle lines to treat civilians and even treated Confederate soldiers. She was captured a prisoner of war in Richmond until the prisoner President Andrew Johnson gave her the Congressional Medal of Honor after the Civil War. Why did you decide that these 4 patriots were not worthy enough to have their names on base? Well, Senator, as you know, this was never about the names of the bases they were renamed to. So you don't challenge all bases. You don't want all bases to their original name. Confederate, not about erasing. Okay, you don't care about their military record. You wanted to restore the Confederate names. When you called the Gregg family to tell them that their dad's name was no longer going to be on the base, what was their reaction? Senator, the Army notified them. You didn't call any of the families, and I've spoken with the families, and the families were called by the press. That's how they learned about this. They learned about it from the press. You didn't call the Barfoot family, the Gregg family, and you didn't call the Adams family. I told the families I'd ask you about this today. In fact, 2 of General Gregg's granddaughters, Avery and Sydney, are right here in the audience, and I want to ask you this as I close. While you announced that these brave men and women's names would be stripped from the Virginia bases, no orders to that effect have been received by the base commander. In light of the patriotic service of Van Barfoot, Arthur Gregg, Charity Adams, and Mary Walker, I'd like to ask you simply not to issue the orders changing the name of these Virginia bases. These families, my Commonwealth, are very proud of these heroes. They're satisfied with these names and ask you not to change them. Will you honor these exemplary patriots and keep their worthy names in places on the bases they love and where they serve? Senator, we very much thank and appreciate them for their service, and we'll find ways to recognize them, but the orders will soon be going to those bases to change the names back to the original name. But you have the power to not send them to the
service. I want to go back to something that Senator Hirono mentioned in her question. She credited the Obama administration along with some of their allies with curbing Iran's nuclear capabilities. As I recall, it licensed their aspirations. And serious problem, we're still living with some of that. And by the way, when it comes to deterrence, and I appreciate you making this point, and I agree with my colleague from Alaska, Senator Sullivan, on this, deterrence is definitely made up of weapons, but it is more of a reputation than it is a capability. The capability is only good if you have earned the reputation. And with that in mind, and speaking of Iran and current situation, maybe General, I could ask you this. If further was destroyed, demolished, if all of the nuclear capabilities that Iran has today were wiped out, would the war be shortened or lengthened? Realize that's not the only factor.
Yes, sir. That's, and of course, I can't split that hair given the complexities of the war that's ongoing there. So I'd rather not comment on one particular part. You know, the Israelis are, as reported in the open source press, are making great progress. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
And I understand and appreciate that. Can you then highlight for me that there, as we talk about deterrence and reputation, I'm sitting here thinking about the air superiority that Israel has accomplished over Iran. I'd like to have you speak to that, and then speak perhaps to the lack of air superiority that Russia's had over Ukraine, and the difference in those two wars. And my point being, how important is air superiority in the current fights and in our future?
So we could spend hours talking about the advocacy of air power. I think the freedom of maneuver that it creates is a great example of that. If you look at the two theaters right now with the Israeli Air Force striking at will at this point over Iran, juxtaposed with the challenges that we're having with a frozen forward line of troops in Europe is a great case study of it. You know, the great thinkers, air power thinkers, are looking at the advancement in technologies from both theaters, the advancement of first-person view drones and things like that. And I think folks are going to have to think clearly about what does the future of air superiority look like, and how does it evolve to make sure that we're protecting those essential teammates that are on the ground fighting in order to prevent frozen plots, forward lines of troops in the future.
I appreciate that. Secretary Hegseth, there's been some discussion, certainly in your opening statements, and then a couple of questions related to base defense. And this would be some of both the speakers, but I'd like to start with you, Secretary. Obviously, we've seen some pretty spectacular displays of the ability to go deep and covertly deep within the enemy's territory to take out some pretty significant assets, both in Russia and in Iran. A lot of us fear that we're vulnerable as well. You spoke very briefly, a reference, I think, in response to one of Senator Gilbert's questions about the importance of policy. So when we talk about the United States itself and our bases here in the country, policy is a bigger challenge than weapons, to be honest. But what about responsibility? In other words, I think there's some confusion over who's, is there a service, is there an institution that's responsible for base security and base defense, or is it up to the individual services to protect their own bases? Can you help straighten that out for me?
Senator, you're right to ask the question. We met on this very topic 2 days ago, because you're right, we've already made initial efforts, but I liken it to the effort that was made around IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan, where it couldn't be a service-only response. It needed to be across the joint force. It needed to be immediate, and the capabilities had to be prepared to adapt in real time to adjustments the enemy is making. And you saw that in things like in counter IED technology. We need the same type of effort in counter UAS, not just forward deployed, because right now you do it with what you have, but also at home considering the authority. So that is something the department is doing in real time.
Yeah, but second, I guess that's it. I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Kramer. Senator King.
Mr. Secretary, I'm somewhat puzzled. I grew up in Virginia where Robert E. Lee was revered. I think when I was a kid, his birthday was a school holiday. But as I grew older and learned more about American history, I learned that he fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army, which he took upon entering his career at West Point. Why are you going through these incredible gymnastics, finding current soldiers or other soldiers to rename? And you slipped a minute ago. You said we're returning these bases to their original names. Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Hegseth, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
Senator, the veterans and service members across the country who have deployed from Fort Bragg or Fort Bend or Fort Hood or Fort Pickett, there's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do, all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. What we're looking at is erasing history, erasing names, erasing base names that service members are tied to.
Not
Talk to people that serve at Bragg. Ask people that serve at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning if they like the fact that the names have been returned. And to a man and to a woman, they will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg, and thank God we're back. And thankfully, because so many men and women in this country have served, there's a Benning and a Bragg and a Pickett and a Hood that has a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor that we could rename the base to because of the limits of what Congress allowed us to do. So this is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Let me talk about the budget. I don't understand why the budget is coming to us in two pieces. Why not give us an honest base budget instead of putting a piece of it in recognition, in reconciliation? As I understand it, OMB is saying we're going to have a flat defense budget for the next 4 or 5 years. Are we planning reconciliation every year from now on? Why not give us an honest budget, telling us what your priorities are, and then we can consider it. This committee always works in a bipartisan basis on the defense budget. We all want to see some increases in the defense budget, and yet you're giving us this this fake, here's a piece of the budget, here's another. You're cutting in the base budget, you're cutting shipbuilding in half and saying, well, we're going to make it up in reconciliation. Are we going to have reconciliation every year, which basically, by the way, puts a significant part, 10 or 15% of the defense budget in a wholly partisan decision-making process, whereas in the history of this committee, it's always been bipartisan. Why are we doing it this way?
Senator, from our view, the budget number 961 meets the requirements and threats that we face, and
That's not the number. The number is 892.6. You're adding reconciliation. That's my whole point. Why not give us a base budget of 961 or whatever the right number is, what you consider the right number, and then we can operate and make our decisions. Why do it in this bifurcated way that really is fooling the American people about what the defense budget is?
we're not trying to fool anybody, sir. It's 2 bills, 1 budget.
I haven't asked my
We're
question.
working with
Why is
OMB,
it
and
being done
we feel
this
very
way?
comfortable
Why
with
is it
the
being
number of
done this way?
961 billion.
Why don't you give us a straight up budget for the Defense Department? That's my question.
Senator, this is a straight up budget for the Defense Department. It's a
It is
13%
not.
increase over what Joe Biden
It is a
gave us.
two-part defense budget. Part of it is in reconciliation instead of in the budget that's being presented to this committee. This committee only has a partial review of the budget. I don't understand why we can't have an honest, straightforward budget instead of this son of Oko that you're putting over on us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank each of you for being here, and I want to thank you for your dedication to the country, each of you. So, Secretary, so you talked a little bit in your opening statement about China. So, this committee, we've basically outlawed the use of Chinese drones by our government and our military. We have the ability now going forward that we won't even license them in this country. Can you just talk about the importance of making sure that our military, we don't have Chinese products, whether it's drones, we don't buy Chinese drugs for our military, we don't allow China to buy farmland close to our military bases, we don't allow them to be involved in our electrical grid, bring in despicable foods into our commissaries. Can you talk about the importance of that when you have a government that wants to destroy everybody in this room's way of life?
You're correct in what you're describing, Senator. We need to get smarter faster. And that's the kind of urgency that we feel in the Defense Department. There's been a lot of talk about prioritization and pivoting and recognizing the size and scale and scope of the Chinese threat. And then there's doing everything possible inside your decision cycle to include how you posture, how you procure, how you plan to ensure that it's not reliant in any way. You don't have Achilles heels in any part of the process, whether it's critical munitions or it's critical minerals or it's any number of our weapon systems. I mean, you've heard the president say, Golden Dome is, big signature priority for the defending the homeland will be American made. Because we can't have systems like that dependent on what the Chinese could do about it later on. So we completely agree with you, and myself and the Deputy Secretary that's kind of an A number one for us, is in making sure that what we source is sustainable.
So if Communist China continues to build up their economy, do you think they'll continue to invest in the military?
Yes, sir, and I think a lot of that spending is commingled.
And do you believe that that if the American public knew the risk of China, like when you think about it every day, that they buy fewer Chinese products?
Sure, sir, it's our job to think about that every day. If a lot of the information we saw would be made public, there would probably be more urgency, yes, sir.
Do you think that we ought to be allowing Chinese companies to be able that support either the economy of China so they can build up a military, or companies that actually work with the Chinese military? Do you think they ought to be able to sell stocks in America?
Senator, that's not really my lane, but I would say that the president is focused, especially through trade, on right-sizing a lot of those dynamics and making sure that American companies, American industries are protected and brought back to the United States.
So whether it's Americans buying products that help trying to build their economy, so they can build a military to try to defeat us, or whether it's buying Chinese drones or drugs, or allowing them to buy farmland, you would recommend to the American public that we wake up and stop doing these things?
Generally speaking, Senator, yes.
Thank you.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So President Trump has deployed the National Guard and then the U.S. Marines to Los Angeles over the objections of state and local officials, saying that the troops are needed to support immigration detention operations that are being carried out by ICE. On Sunday night, the president threatened to deploy ICE agents to other cities around the country that he sees as, quote, the core of the Democrat power center, end quote, specifically mentioning Chicago and New York. Secretary Hegseth, if the president wanted to deploy Marines to Chicago and New York City like he did in Los Angeles, would you carry out that order even if the local governors and mayors objected?
Well, Senator, because Governor Newsom was unwilling to address
That's not my
protecting
question.
federal law enforcement agents in Los Angeles, President Trump had all the authorities, and the Defense Department happily supported defending our ICE agents in the conduct of their job. They have the right, as Americans, to be able to do their job without being attacked by mobs. And
I
we will
know-
protect them in that
I know
process,
that
and
you've
if
heard
other
my
states
question.
needed it, we would provide that.
I know that you heard my question, so you would be willing to send troops if the president ordered it to Chicago, New York City? That's right.
Well, thankfully, New York City, unlike California, unlike Gavin Newsom, is willing to step up and address the issue with the local law
I will
enforcement.
take that as a yes. How about if the president says he wants to send troops to 15 cities? Would you be willing to do that?
Senator, I don't accept your hypothetical because it's
That's
Not a real
That's the
one.
question, you're the Secretary of Defense. Would you send troops to 15 cities if the president said do it? Would you do it? 15 cities.
again, Senator, it's a complete hypothetical lacking any context
Look,
at all.
you're the
And I
Secretary
refuse to
of
box
Defense.
myself in based on
Well, you
questioning on a
refuse, but
hypothetical.
you're here asking for $1 trillion, and I wanna know how you're gonna spend it. And so my question is, if Donald Trump tells you to send troops to 15 American cities, are you gonna spend the money and send the troops?
Thankfully, we're spending money on securing our southern border, a way the previous administration abandoned and allowed
Okay, so
21
you're not
million
gonna answer
illegals to
that
enter our
question
country. So
anyway.
defending our homeland is a real serious priority under this administration, and we're doing
I
it.
understand the question about defense. Secretary Hegseth, about 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines have been sent to LA. Is there a number of troops deployed to American cities over the objections of governors and mayors at which you would be concerned that we are undermining our national defense?
Senator, we've spent 2 decades guarding other people's borders. We think at the Defense Department it's about time we shore up ours.
So that's my question. Is there a number at which sending those troops to Los Angeles or Chicago or New York starts to undermine our ability to defend ourselves around the globe? Is there a number?
Senator, we look at capabilities and readiness around the globe all the time, and we're quite satisfied with our capabilities to defend the homeland, and we'll provide more if and when it's
So you
necessary.
are satisfied with our capabilities. Let me just ask, have you actually done an analysis and figured out how many troops you can deploy domestically before you start to undermine readiness around the world? Have you done that analysis?
Yes, ma'am.
Then would you let the rest of us in on it? We are the Senate Armed Services Committee, and you're here to ask for $1 trillion. What's the number?
We've got contingencies and plans for any number of capabilities should governors be unable, as Gavin Newsom has been,
Well, can you
to
give
actually
us a
secure his
ballpark
own
on
federal
what that
agents
number
in
is?
their cities.
How many troops can you deploy domestically before you start to cut into our readiness internationally?
As I said, previous administrations deployed our National Guard all around the globe in numbers far beyond what we were capable of supporting. So limited contingencies inside the United States to protect federal law enforcement is
Orders
doable.
you to remove troops from American city streets. Will you do so?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. If the Supreme Court orders you to remove troops from American cities, will you do so?
As I've said, Senator, I don't believe district courts should determine national security policy, but if the
That was
Supreme
not my
Court
question.
rules on a topic, we will abide by that.
Okay. During her press conference last week, Secretary Nome said, "We are staying here to liberate the city from its mayor and its governor, people who are elected by a majority of voters." Secretary Hegseth is saying he is ready to deploy more troops and won't tell us what the implications are for our national defense. This is un-American and it makes us unsafe. I wish our Republican colleagues would speak out.
The time of the senator is expired. Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here today. Mr. Secretary, thanks for looking out for the law enforcement and the millions of people in California that still love this country and want this country to survive, and not the radicals that wave non-American flags, that protest in the streets, tear things down. It is ridiculous, and thank you for doing what you're doing, you and President Trump. It's getting out of hand. Chairman of the Personnel Committee, thanks for your recruiting, you're doing great. Keep looking out after the quality of life. Please do that. We've done research after research. We did give a raise. We want to continue to give raises. These first-year staffers in this building make tens of thousands of dollars more than first-year military personnel. That's not right. We need to change that. It's an all-volunteer Army, and thank you for working towards that. Mr. Secretary, China's kicking our butt in AI. Yeah, they can build something in a year that takes us 3 or 4 years to build. The budget provides for increase in an AI investment of $250 million. Is that adequate for us to catch up with China?
Senator, we are very aware of the accelerant that is AI, and that it is the next chapter, the next sphere of where advantages will be gained. And we are making the necessary investments, we believe, in this budget to stay there. We're also working with private industry in the United States, who's thankfully at this point isn't getting their butt kicked yet by China, and I think presents an opportunity for us to work with them to press the advantage. So we're looking for private partners as well to enhance our capabilities across the DoD.
You have to know your problems and where you're at before you can go forward. And hopefully we're understanding that. Obviously, we've got a lot of problems that's going on. Mr. Secretary, your opening remarks mentioned the force-wide review of military standards. What's the status of that review?
It is ongoing and very close to fruition. We've reviewed standards specifically on combat MOSs first to ensure that we haven't seen a reduction in pursuit of quotas or any other agendas. So standards are being moved back to where they were at their highest level, with gender neutral. And then we're looking at overall fitness standards, overall grooming standards, overall basic standards across our formations that we believe have slipped, certainly under the previous administration, but over decades. But we're being very careful about it too. We don't want to make big changes that are wide sweeping, that have unintended consequences. So we're looking service by service, but also trying to simplify and clarify as much as possible. High standards, clear standards that set us apart.
Thanks for your help in putting me on the Air Force Board of Visitors, Military Academy, and look forward to going out soon. It is very important we understand we do have problems in the Air Force Academy, and we want to get those straightened out one way or another. So thanks for you and President Trump putting me on that the Board of Visitors. General Kane, last few years we've seen major efforts to refocus our services for future fights. Marine Force design and the Army's transformation initiative are major changes to the joint force. Can you describe the joint staff's level of involvement in these efforts?
Sure, thanks for the question. As the services carefully consider what they need to look like, one of my primary jobs is a global integrator, and so I look at all of these capabilities as well as capacities, and then through a series of formal products that we deliver to the Secretary, have a chance to give the Secretary my views on this. I appreciate the leadership of both of those services, all of the services, and the combatant commanders to identify what the fight of the future looks like and what the force mix of the future needs to look like. So we're deeply involved in all that.
Thank you. This right up my alley here. One important aspect of recruiting is how our services are represented in elite sports. We have made progress here, but we still have to work and work some things out. But West Point this year, they had a young man that was drafted to play baseball. In the past time when President Trump was in, he had allowed them to go do their thing in baseball, then come back and fulfill their service, but we're disallowing a young man at West Point to go to Major League Baseball. Could you look into that, Mr. Secretary?
Coach, we will review that, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General King, both before and during your confirmation hearing, we discussed your commitment to duty and to adhering to the Constitution as well as your oath of office. I certainly appreciated your reassurance that you will remain, quote, a nonpartisan leader through and through, unquote. With one of your top priorities being maintaining the independence of the U.S. military. Along with remaining apolitical, I'm sure you will agree that fostering a stable, mission-focused environment is essential to leading the Department of Defense. So my question for you, sir, is can you please share with this committee and the American people what your approach to leadership as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is?
Yes, sir. It's certainly the job is one to understand the global set of challenges, integrate the options that must be considered, and then to present those options to the president. And I've always taken a servant leadership approach throughout my career, based on my oath of office and the Constitution and my commission.
And as a non-partisan leader, you reiterate that.
Always, yeah, I reiterate that.
Well, thank you. And as a former lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserve, I certainly agree with that and agree with your answers and your commitment to the men and women in uniform. Secretary Hegseth, your approach to leadership, I believe, stands in direct conflict with the ideas that we just discussed with General King. And at a time of great chaos and uncertainty in the world, I'm extremely concerned that your many shortcomings could have potentially life-threatening consequences for American service members. In your confirmation hearing, I expressed my deep reservations about your qualifications to run the DoD. I also made it clear that no board of directors in the world would hire someone with so little experience to run a large business, much less the Department of Defense, where American lives are on the line regularly. For this reason, in addition to some concerns we had about character, I ultimately opposed your nomination. And unfortunately, my reservations have become reality. I know my colleagues have touched on some of these issues, but to briefly summarize, you have failed to set the example, or lead from the front, as you like to say. And this includes prompting a leadership and oversight vacuum at the department by firing qualified uniformed leaders without cause, creating loyalty tests and leak investigations that have led to 5 of your senior advisors resigning or being fired, sharing classified military details on an unsecure app during operations in Yemen that included unauthorized individuals on at least 2 separate occasions, and revoking the DoD personal protection detail for both Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and the former Chairman of Joint Chiefs Mark Milley, putting their safety at risk while they are still under threat from Iran. We have seen time and time again how your conduct, lack of personal responsibility, are harming readiness, reputation, and professionalism of our military. At a time where Israel and Iran are in open conflict and our adversaries in Russia and China will exploit any weaknesses, unfortunately, worst fears about your leadership shortfalls, unfortunately, have been realized. Secretary, I firmly believe that accountability from leadership is vital in all sectors, not just in the military. And demonstrating to your subordinates that everyone plays by the same rules helps to build trust and open communications within your team. And those two things are extremely important. And I know that you share my desire to ensure that we're holding our senior leaders accountable for actions. And during your nomination hearing, you say that, quote, accountability is coming because everybody in this room knows if you are a rifleman and you lose your rifle, they are throwing the book at you, end of quote. You also said that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability. And I couldn't agree more on how important accountability is. As we all know, at the request of this committee, the Department of Defense Inspector General launched an investigation into your use of Signal, an unclassified commercially available messaging application to discuss information pertaining military actions in Yemen. So given your focus on accountability, how will you demonstrate this accountability to the men and women in the U.S. military if the Inspector General finds that you improperly disclosed information?
That assessment is pending at this time.
That is a hypothetical question. But the gentleman's time is expired.
I think your answer is clear. You are not going to be held accountable.
Thank you very much, Senator Peter. Senator Mullen.
talk about accountability, I wonder who's held accountable for the disastrous withdrawal out of Afghanistan, where 13 soldiers died, and we left thousands of Americans behind. Underneath Secretary Austin's lead, did one person get held accountable during that time? I don't know of anybody that held accountable for Afghanistan withdrawal. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about the turmoil to which my colleagues on the other side of the dais wants to talk about. Let's talk about that turmoil. Underneath Secretary Austin, who was a general, by the way, you had the lowest morale measured in our military history. You had retention absolutely disastrous. You had recruitments that wasn't even meeting the lowered standards that you guys lowered. But let me see the contrast now. We have the highest morale that's been measured in decades in the military. We have recruiting numbers that are exceeding expectations that we've had. We have our enemies that fear us once again, and our allies that love us because they can trust us. But that's not the narrative, Secretary Hegseth, that our Democrat colleagues want to draw. But how short-minded is your memory? It was just a few months ago that you were supporting the commander-in-chief that you guys were covering up for or flat out lying about. Who was in charge? And that was the commander-in-chief. Although let's not talk about that. Instead, let's just point fingers at something that fits a narrative. You want to talk about war powers or the fact that during our reposturing in the Middle East against Iran, which would have never taken place if our colleagues on the other side would have held the administration accountable while they're giving billions of dollars back to Iran and knowing good and well during the briefings that they were actually trying to develop a nuclear weapon, but we turned a blind eye to that, and now the mess that was created by the Biden administration, this administration, or the Trump administration, and the leadership of Secretary Hegseth is simply trying to clean up. But forget about the past. Let's talk about this. Oh, well, let's talk about reposturing, by the way. And wasn't it Secretary of the Navy, Del Toro, that came to us and said that he was fighting the largest naval battle since World War II? Did anybody in this dais authorize that? That was his words. He said right there where Secretary Hegseth was, and I laughed. And I said, I didn't think the Houthis had a navy, so why are we fighting a naval battle there? And did you guys complain about it? Did y'all say one thing about it? No. You sat there. Because, hey, it didn't fit your narrative, but this one does. And then you want to start talking about the National Guard and the Marines. Didn't President Eisenhower deploy troops or federalized troops in Arkansas in 1957? And also deploy the 101st Airborne because the governor then refused to protect civil rights and personal property? Yeah. What about President Kennedy in 62 and 63? That also did it because Mississippi and Alabama refused to do the same thing. And so since the governor at that time refused to protect the citizens and the property, he federalized the National Guard. Oh, let's think about 65 too, because LBJ did the exact same thing. But that's history. But yet it's extremely important to the context of what you guys are claiming to be done here. But that doesn't fit the narrative that you guys want to put out there. History is history. Look back at it if you want to or not. But keep in mind, every time you're pointing fingers here, you got 3 fingers pointing back at you. Because the previous administration, you guys 100% turned a blind eye to and did nothing to hold them accountable. Nothing. So don't set up there on the dice and pretend like you're trying to hold the administration accountable now, because you didn't for 4 years. You literally covered up for a commander-in-chief that was absent. Absent-minded and absent leadership. And you guys did absolutely nothing. Even your left-leaning media is saying it was the worst cover-up possibly in political history. Yet nothing from you guys. You all should be ashamed of yourself. Literally, you should be ashamed of yourself. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Mullen. Senator Rosen.
I yield my time to Senator Duckworth.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to my colleague from Oklahoma, I believe the Secretary of Defense has just responded last week and admitted that the $1 billion mission that he led against the Houthis, who do not have a navy, has not restored the transit of U.S. flag commercial vessels through the Red Sea, and in fact has resulted in the loss of 2 F-18 Hornets to the tune of $60 million apiece, as well as, I believe the last count was 7 Reaper drones to the tune of another $200 million. You are blowing through money like my fellow cadets and I did in our First Liberty after basic camp. Luckily, I didn't end up with a questionable tattoo. Your failures, Mr. Secretary, since you've taken office has been staggering. You sent classified operational information over Signal to chest bump in front of your wife, who, by the way, has no security clearance, risking service member lives in the process. You blew the $1 billion fight against the Houthis, whom, again, as my colleague says, has no navy, and yet we lost all of those aircraft. You created such a hostile command environment that no one wants to serve as your chief of staff or work with you in other senior DoD leadership roles. But what we should all be talking about, more than all of this, is that you have an unjustified, un-American misuse of the military in American cities, pulling resources and attention away from core missions to the detriment of the country, the war fighters, and yes, the war fighting that you claim to love. I don't know if this is because you are too inexperienced and incompetent to understand the real threats facing our country, or if it's because you're just an unqualified yes man who can't tell the president how to keep Americans safe. You are focusing on renaming bases for Confederate generals. You said just now to Senator King that to a man and to a woman, we would rather be associated with the old Confederate names. Well, I am one of those women. I served at Fort Rucker, Alabama, a base that was named for a traitor who took arms against the United States of America, led troops who killed Americans. It was renamed for Mike Novosel, a Medal of Honor recipient, who in his citation for the Medal of Honor includes that he saved 29 American lives, to include hovering backwards in a helicopter towards an enemy bunker where a wounded American was laying and saved that person, including after being taken fire himself. I know a little something about what it takes to fly a helicopter when you get hit by enemy fire. That was heroic. I'd rather be associated with Mike Novosel than a failed Confederate traitor. I don't know whether you are inexperienced or too incompetent, but I wonder when you will actually focus on our nation's warfighting mission. We know that California is just a deliberate, systematic, political, and dangerous campaign led by you. We should not be using our military to create cops against Americans. General Kane, as chairman, a key part of your job is to coordinate military planning across the joint force. Is the department currently incorporating into any military plans expanding the use of the reserve forces to include the National Guard or active duty troops to support domestic law enforcement, including in other locations in the United States?
Senator, we carefully.
No, General.
Well, it's not really a yes or no question, Madam Senator. We plan all kinds of different things.
I think it is a
I'm
yes
not
or no
aware of
question.
I'm not aware of anything, but the reason why I'm answering is the tags may be looking at something that I'm not aware
What are
of.
you doing at your level? You're not aware of that being happening at your level? Because we know that on his first day, President Trump directed U.S. Northern Command to revise its unified command plan to add new planning requirements to combat, and I quote, criminal activities. A series of follow-up executive orders continue to redirect DoD priorities to supporting domestic law enforcement, including one in April that tells DoD, and I quote, use national security assets for law and order. In other words, do law enforcement's job. I'd like to enter these executive orders into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Secretary Hegseth, you say you are focused on warfighting and warriors. These are your words. Yet you are diverting untold DoD resources and attention to the fundamentally non-military mission of domestic policing. Across the country, we have qualified police officers who are trained for that mission. They know those streets better than the Marines who deploy to Los Angeles, who normally focus on the Indo-Pacific. And you recently approved 700 more troops in 3 other states to do admin and logistics works for ICE. You say all of this is valuable training, but I would much rather have our troops do tough, realistic training relevant to high-end combat. Instead of typing in spreadsheets for ICE, they should be conducting live fire maneuver exercises. Instead of patrolling American neighborhoods and standing in front of federal buildings, they should be rehearsing call for fire missions. We have local police who can stand in front of those federal buildings. And the list of distractions goes on. You are encouraging the DoD workforce to go work for DHS in increasing numbers. You're pulling the military away from facing foreign enemies who literally say things like death to America. And you're putting troops with weapons aimed at Americans. Mr. Secretary, let the military get back to its real job. Stop forcing them to do DHSs. And if you want to be a DHS secretary, maybe you can apply for that job when you're fired from this one due to your incompetence.
The senator's time has expired. Senator Budd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I think you all are doing a great job, and the proof is in the pudding. If you look at morale, you look at recruiting, you look at deterrence. Incredible performance compared to the last administration, so thank you all for your work and in short order as well. Mr. Secretary, while I was overseas and time zones away this past weekend, I was able to watch the parade, even though it was on the size of a phone screen. But I just wanted to catch a quick glimpse at it, since it was controversial from the other side. And I tell you what, I stayed up until 2 a.m. I could not turn it off, because it wasn't about you, Mr. Secretary. It wasn't about our president. It was about the men and women that don't get recognized each and every day. And I could just see them grinning underneath their helmets and their battle dress uniforms, smiling from ear to ear, being recognized, whether it's on TV or by those of us in elected office that were present, or the folks that stood up to support them. So thank you for that. And again, back to the morale that we're seeing in recruiting numbers, I think it will go even higher as a result of that. So I appreciate what you did. Mr. Secretary, I want to echo what my colleague Senator Kramer said a few moments ago about air dominance. And in previous years, Air Force officials have recommended purchasing at least 72 fighters a year, which would be reachable by maximizing F-35 and then the F-15EX production lines. And I applaud the President's decision to proceed with the F-47, but I understand it's going to take a while before that's developed and fielded. And I'm interested in maintaining a strong level of production of other advanced fighters in the interim. So what can you tell us about the future of the F-15EX in particular while we await the arrival of the F-47? Mr. Secretary, that'd be for you. And Mr. Chairman, you've got experience, significant experience as a fighter pilot, so if you would care to weigh in as well.
To your point, Senator, I would defer the balance of my air superiority time to the chairman. But I would note that the budget does have a substantial increase on F-15EX, recognizing its capabilities and the bridging function that particular aircraft provides us. And all of this with an eye toward existing fights and future fights, but it certainly does make an investment.
Sure, thanks for the question. And you could use the current Israeli efforts as a case study in air dominance and air superiority. And if you look at harder problems in Iran, you start to see the importance of having the mix of things like F-47, EX, and any other future capabilities that we consider. So we have to stay up on the TAC Air staff, and appreciate your leadership and interest in this, sir, as we move forward.
Thank you. Switching gears a bit, Mr. Secretary, our Special Operations Forces play a crucial role in preventing and then winning armed conflict. However, the previous administration proposed cuts to soft billets in the programs. So how does the President's budget request impact the size, structure, and posture of our Special Operations Forces for 2026?
Well, sorry, what you will not see is cuts to soft billets, especially recognizing not just the last 25 years, but even the op-tempo of the last 4 to 6 years, and the recognition that those are forces that are used often, mobilized often. There's a stress and strain on that. And so investments both in personnel, but also training and capabilities is front and center.
Thank you for that. Last year, I led an NDAA provision that mandates that all future annual defense planning guidance includes specifics with respect to the size, structure, posture, and priorities for SOF. So I want to make clear the importance of this directive. The committee was due a report back on March 1st on this component of the defense planning guidance. But since that date has come and gone, I'll ask now, will you, Mr. Secretary, commit to seeing this requirement through and providing an update to this committee on this process?
Yes, Senator, we'll get that to you.
Thank you.
I want to ask briefly about munitions, General Kane. How do you see the rate of munitions usage in Ukraine, in the Middle East, particularly our ground-based interceptors and air-to-air missiles influencing this budget request and future budget requests?
Well, Senator, we're always mindful of the consumption rate. One of the great case stories of the fight in the Middle East is the advancement of use of rockets, laser rockets, to target one-way attack drones, which I know the committee helped push, and that's helping us save some of our critical area munitions. And I can circle back with you on the other matters offline, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Kelly, Senator Rosen yielded her time to Senator Duckworth, who was scheduled to be last. Do you think that we ought to go ahead and let Senator Rosen ask questions right now?
100%.
Absolutely. Senator Rosen, you're recognized. I thought I would just create a stir down there.
No, I thank you to my seatmates on both sides. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We take care of each other. Again, thank you, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, for holding this hearing, Mr. Secretary. We have a short amount of time, so I'm just going to ask a few simple questions, and I would just appreciate it for something you would just answer yes or no. And so, Secretary Hegseth, would you agree that every senior official in the Department of Defense must reflect the values and conduct that our service members must uphold and our citizens expect?
Senator, we want to uphold the highest possible standards.
I take that for a yes. So would you also agree then that anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories have no place in our government or military? Yes or no?
They should not.
Thank you. So would you also agree that anyone who has posted, and I'm going to quote, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories lifted right out of a neo-Nazi playbook, end quote, shouldn't be anywhere near a position of power? Yes or no?
Since I don't believe the characterization of many officials in the news.
What you looking
I
for?
don't see precisely what's being characterized.
But generally, would you not say that if
Generally
we
speaking,
thought
sure.
something was coming out of a neo-Nazi playbook, it doesn't have any place in our Department of Defense? Now, Secretary Hegseth, the quote that I just read you was referencing Ms. Kingsley Wilson, the DoD press secretary. It's a direct quote from her, who my Republican colleagues on this committee have also expressed alarm over due to her comments. In fact, one colleague said, and I'm going to quote again, obviously I don't agree with her comments. I trust the Pentagon will address this, end quote. However, in the months since, not only have you not addressed these anti-Semitic comments, you have promoted Ms. Wilson. This seems to be at odds, honestly, with President Trump's commitment, very public commitment to combat anti-Semitism, which you just said you two agreed with. So, Secretary Hegseth, given the rise in anti-Semitic violence, hate crimes in our nation, and to show that the Trump administration, your administration, does have a zero-tolerance policy for anti-Semitism, will you dismiss Ms. Kingsley from her role as a U.S. military spokesperson today, yes or no?
Again, that's why I referenced the context and characterization.
Well, we'll send you the quote,
I've worked directly with her. She does a fantastic job, and there's any suggestion that I or her or others are party to anti-Semitism is a mischaracterization, attempting to win political points. Senator, you're attempting to win political points on the backs of mischaracterizing the statements of a member of my department, and I'm not going to stand for that.
You are not a serious person. You are not serious about rooting out, fighting anti-Semitism within the ranks of our DoD. It's despicable. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. I want to move on to General Hawk. It's not an inexplicable dismissal of General Hawk. He serves both director of the National Security Agency, commander of U.S. Cybercom. It's deeply concerning, raises significant questions about the decision-making process and its potential consequences. Public reports indicate that the removal of General Hawk, who has served his country proudly, has been influenced by social media influencer. An influencer personality on social media, Laura Loomer, spreads conspiracy theories. She's been denounced even by Republicans. And the idea is that any leaders within our agencies responsible for our nation's security, somebody would be dismissed based on the advice of a social media influencer is alarming, to say the least. It's surely not how we should be running our military. So Were you consulted regarding General Hoxton's dismissal, yes or no?
Senator, I would not advise believing everything you read in the media.
Were you,
And I'm
were you
consulted on every
consulted?
single decision.
Okay,
I'm
so
the
that's
decision
a
maker
part.
for the
It's your
department. We all
department.
serve at the pleasure of the president,
Okay.
and
So
we have
what
the
was your-
prerogative to
what
make
was
those
your rec-
decisions
What was
that's
your
best for the
recommendation?
country,
Did
and
you
we did that.
personally approve Mr. Hawks' dismissal, yes or no?
Anyone coming or going in the Defense Department, especially at that level, would ultimately be a decision
So
made by
that's a
me,
yes.
and I
Did you
stand
personally
behind that.
believe him?
Excuse
Did
me?
you personally believe him? Yes or no?
Anyone at that level
You
who
did,
is
so that's a
believed
yes.
would be relieved by the Secretary of Defense.
Was there a specific justification for General Hawks' dismissal? Was there a specific justification for General Hawks' dismissal?
Ma'am, we all serve at the pleasure of the president, and the president deserves the
Is
type
it
of
true?
commanders and advisors that he thinks will best
Did you
equip him
discuss General
to
Hawks'
accomplish the
dismissal with
mission.
Laura Loomer prior to his removal?
I don't discuss who I talk about anything with, but ultimately this is my decision, and he serves at the pleasure of the president, and that's why he's no longer there.
So, do you believe it's appropriate for any social media personality to influence personnel decisions in your department, yes or no?
I believe your time is up, Senator.
Oh, it is not up to you to tell me when my time is up.
Well, the time.
And I am
is
going to
saying-
say, Mr. Secretary, you're either feckless or complicit, you're not in control of your department. Yours is unserious, it is shocking, you're not combating anti-Semitism within your ranks. It's a dangerous and pivotal time in our nation's history. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. And I don't appreciate the smirk, sir. You are the Secretary of Defense.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I want to talk about the proposed Golden Dome missile defense system. There's a request to spend $25 billion in this year alone. First of all, is this system designed to intercept a full salvo attack?
Senator, it's a multi-layer system that would include different types of salvos. Obviously,
So it's not just Rogue Nation. Okay. So
well, it's meant to, yes, it's not meant to be just one nation. It could be utilized in.
against Russia and China, full salvo. So what kind of reliability are you aiming to build into the system? Are we looking for something like 4 nines on intercept success? 99.99% reliability.
Obviously, you seek the highest possible. You begin with what you have and integrating those C2 networks and sensors, building up capabilities that are existing with an eye toward future capabilities that can come online as quickly as possible, not just ground-based, but space-based.
So
all
future, against future capability too. So do you
Correct.
believe that we can build a system that can intercept all incoming threats? You think we could build that system? This is a very hard physics problem.
You would know as well as anybody, sir, how difficult this problem is, and that's why we put our best people on it. We think the American people deserve it.
So let me tell you what I think we're facing here. We're talking about hundreds of ICBMs launched simultaneously, varying trajectories, MIRVs, so multiple reentry vehicles, thousands of decoys, hypersonic glide vehicles, all at once. And considering what the future threat might even be more complicated than that. And you're proposing spending not just $25 billion, but upwards of, I think CBO estimated this at least $500 billion, other estimates, $1 trillion. I am all for having a system that would work. I am not sure that the physics can get there on this.